Bible exists to tell us that life is best lived connected with God and others. So last week, Pastor John opened up our series in the book of Genesis, because we're going from Genesis to Revelation in the next 4 weeks. And he started off in the book of Genesis, and we discussed how we lost connection with God and with each other, and we looked at the story of Adam and Eve. So to continue that series, this week we're actually going to look at how humanity tries to find connection on its own. And so this morning, I want you to think about the lost connections or maybe the fractured connections that you have with God or with other people. And I want you to think of them like a void. And I kind of want you to think of it like a void, like this bucket, right? Pretend this bucket is the void of connection in your life. And oftentimes we feel disconnected from people or God. We try to fill this void of connection with other things. This whole list may not be you, but something in here is you, right? Sometimes we try to fill that void with more work, right? We get so much more invested to what we do. And we just put our heads down and we just work and we try to build that bridge and it always falls short, right? Sometimes it's maybe we get a new hobby, right? Maybe it's gardening, maybe it's making music, maybe it's baking, maybe it's French fries in all sorts of different places. That was my hobby in 2020. It fell short. I was still disconnected, right? Maybe it's new relationships. Maybe you're like, hey, I'm going to go to that park. I'm going to go to that group. I'm going to go do these things. And I'm going to find new relationships that are just shallow. And that falls deep. Maybe for you, it's excuses. Like me, every morning when my alarm goes off and I say, I'm so tired, I don't want to work out today. Or I'm so tired, the kids can make their own lunch. I don't want to do that today, right? Maybe it's excuses that we make. Maybe you're trying to fill that gap with spontaneous trips. I love this. If you want to go on a spontaneous trip, let me know. But it still doesn't fill the void in my heart of connections. Maybe it's technology. Maybe it's just continuing more into isolation. Maybe it's setting more unattainable goals that you know you're not going to hit. Whatever it is, we try to fill the void in our lives with different things. And we're no different than the nation of Israel. When Moses went up to Mount Sinai, they were like, he's been gone so long that they immediately tried to fill the void of Moses' relationship and authority with an idol of a golden calf. And then when he came back down, they're like, well, you're gone so long, maybe we should idolize these laws that you got and these stones here. And then they even went as far as idolizing themselves and this destination of the promised land. I mean, Israel became so obsessed with the promised land that the longer it took to reach it, the more they allowed their relationship with the Lord and each other to become a bad connection or even disconnected. So in the same way, how has your pursuit of the destination superseded your connection with God and others? Otherwise stated, how have you made your promised land more important than the relationships in your life? So today we'll be looking at Joshua 3. So as you turn your Bible or open your Bible apps to Joshua 3, I want you to ponder this phrase, because this is what we're going to unpack today. That it was never about the promised land, but the promise of connection restored. It was never about the promised land, but the promise of connection restored. So let's read Joshua 3. We're going to start in verse 1. It says, early in the morning, Joshua and all the Israelites set out for Shittim and went to Jordan, where they camped before crossing over. After 3 days, the officers went through the camp, giving orders to the people. When you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord and the Levitical priests carrying it, you are to move out from your positions and follow it. Then you will know which way to go, since you have never been this way before. But keep a distance of about 2,000 cubits between you and the ark. Do not go near it. Joshua stood up and told the people, consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do amazing things among you. So before we really just dive into the heart of what's going on there, I just want to catch you up to where the Israelites are and how they got to this place before, because this is important to understand what they have done to actually disconnect themselves from the Lord and from each other. So just a brief history. I'm a history nerd, so I love this. It's a quick little 9-thing list just to kind of catch you up. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I encourage you to read the verses that go with them. The first thing is you got to remember, they were enslaved by the Egyptians. So God freed them from the enslavement of the Egyptians. That's Exodus 1 through 13. Then God parts the Red Sea, and Israel crosses over into freedom. So God is showing up, and God is doing things for them. God is there for them. And they're in this high relationship where they're like, man, we need God to do all these things. Then God gave Moses the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai, which we just talked about. That's where they started to kind of disconnect from the Lord, because the longer Moses was gone, they were freaking out. They were freaking out. Then the people of Israel were worshiping the golden calf when Moses came down. Then right after that, Moses sends the 12 spies into the promised land. And what do the people do when they come back with a bad report? The people rebel against Moses and against the Lord. So what does God do instead? The Israelites wander the desert for 40 years. So now this promised land that they've been promised, it has been 40 years. And I said the longer that they are looking for this land and trying to get to this land, the connections break. So at the end of this 40 years, Moses dies. Moses, who was given this vision of the promised land, dies, never sets foot in this land. Along with all of those freed from the enslavement of the Egyptians, they were told about this land and they never stepped foot in it, right? So Moses dies. Then we hit Joshua 1, where Joshua is installed as the leader of the Israelites. And then Joshua in Joshua 2 sends spies into the promised land. So we went from the promise of the promised land to being at the footstep of the promised land to wandering for 40 years. So now we're at the footstep of the promised land once more. Now, this is just an overview of how we got here, or where we are today. But the key takeaway from this list is that throughout these events, people continue to pick the hope of reaching the promised land over their relationship with God and each other. They minimize the importance of all the lessons along the way. They kind of just blew through what was going on in the moment with the hopes of just reaching this final destination. Like, I said it already, but none of those who were freed from Egypt ever stepped foot in the promised land. They spent their entire existence pursuing this destination, pursuing and putting their hope in a better future that all started with landing in this promised land. This is a land that they never, ever stepped foot in. And now their future, their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren are now at the edge of the promised land one more time, and they face the same question. Do we choose the relationship with the Lord and with each other? Or do we choose this promised land? Joshua 3:5, it says this. It says, Joshua told the people, consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do amazing things among you. Joshua has commanded the people to consecrate themselves to the Lord in preparation for the work that God would do among them. If you're not familiar with what the word consecrate means, it means to make something or declare something sacred, to set apart this thing. And what Joshua is telling them to is to reflect and to remove and to reconcile their relationship with the Lord. He's basically saying, take down whatever walls or roadblocks or distractions that you have placed between yourself and God. Joshua is telling them to focus on God with their whole heart and to hold nothing back from God. And so I pose that to you. What are the walls or the roadblocks or the distractions that you need to move from your life in order to prioritize your relationship with God or others? What are those walls? What are those roadblocks? What are those things that are causing you to lose focus on the relationship with God and other people? As I was thinking about it, it made me think about one of the craziest things ever. But in high school, I was at a football practice. And if you don't know my background a little bit, I played wide receiver through high school and college. But I remember showing up to this practice in the middle of summer, so it was hot. And our coach shows up, and he pulls out these goggles, water holes, and footballs. And I was like, what is about to happen right now? And he pulls these things out, and I'm scared. And I don't have the actual goggles, but they kind of look something like this. Like, I'm going to flip these up. They had like little blinders up here like this. And then there was like this tape down here, right? So I could literally only see through here. And so as I have these goggles on, I'm sitting there, and right away the coach starts spraying the hose, trying to make it seem like it's raining. I am soaking wet, fully padded with these goggles on. And all of a sudden he blows the whistle, and there's 3 quarterbacks facing in front of me, and they're all throwing the football, rapid fire, different angles, different speeds, right? And one of the things that doesn't really matter, but one of the things that I had to put aside right away is I had to put aside all of my fear, all of the distractions of laughing, all the distractions of being wet or just like failing at this thing. But what I realized once I put those things away is that it took every piece of me to catch these balls. When the ball was coming, I literally had to duck my entire body like this. I can't do it now because my knees are crunching. But let me tell you, when I was like 16, it was easy. My knees were like butter. But I had to use my entire body, all my senses. I had to put everything together, and I had to move to see the ball because I only had this slit to see it. And meanwhile, there's water, and the balls are water-soaked, and my hands are wet. But I had to focus only on what was coming to me, and I had to focus every motion, every thought, everything that I was doing just to succeed at that task. And I say all that and I go through all that because in the same way, we oftentimes need to be aware of what's distracting us from what's important. We need to remove and block out the distractions and focus with everything that we have on what God is doing right in front of us. We have to be aware of what's going on in front of us that the Lord is doing. And it all starts with us relating to God first so that we can better relate to those around us. And so if you're taking notes, what Joshua 3:5 is pretty much saying is our first principle for today is to be ready for a restored connection, we must first consecrate ourselves to the Lord. And if you're like, hey, consecrate is kind of big, I'm not going to remember that. Just think about it. You have to first focus your life. Focus everything on the Lord and what he's doing. Set your life apart for God and what he is doing. And in my life, when I feel disconnected from life, or I feel disconnected from work, or my family, or friends, or even just the world around me, I recognize that it starts with my relationship with God. I have to stand back and look at God and say, I am broken. And I know I should talk to you, but I don't want to talk to you. I want to hide. I don't want to talk to you. But I know that I need him to make me aware of all the ways that I'm trying to fix my connection with people by myself. And I need to give all those things up to the Lord because it's only by his love and his faithfulness and his strength and his mercy that my connections will be restored. And I know you want me to keep going down that route. Come back in 2 weeks. I will fully unpack what that looks like and how that has occurred. But for right now, I want you to know to be ready for restored connection, we first must consecrate ourselves to the Lord. You have to consecrate yourself to the Lord. But it doesn't start with just consecrating yourself to the Lord, because when you're doing that, a way to do that is you have to remember what is going on. So let's actually pick our story back up. We're going to fast forward to Joshua chapter 4, and we're going to read verses 1 through 7, and it says this. So this is right after they had crossed over. So when the whole nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, choose 12 men from among the people, one from each tribe, and tell them to take up 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, from right where the priests are standing, and carry them over with you and put them down at the place where you stay tonight. So Joshua called together the 12 men he had appointed from the Israelites, one from each tribe. And he said to them, go over before the ark of the Lord your God into the middle of the Jordan. Each of you is to take up a stone on his shoulders according to the number of tribes of the Israelites, to serve as a sign among you in the future when your children ask you, what do these stones mean? Tell them that the flow of the Jordan was cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. And when it crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. The stones are to be a memorial to the people of Israel forever. So think of this text in this way. Like nowadays, when we have momentous or like memorable occasions, or when things happen, we take pictures, right? It's real easy to be like, okay, everybody get together. Cool. And then what do? Right away, right? We post it to our social media, and we say, man, love hanging out with my crew, love doing this, whatever. And then what happens is, in a year or so, you get this memory, and it says, man, this is what you did 5 years ago today. I always think about, like, this is what I looked like 14 years ago today, right? But it's like, this is what you did on this day, like, 5 years ago. And, like, or, like, I love Google Photos because they'll give you, like, a slideshow of, like, the same person over time. And I'm like, oh, my baby's not a baby. She's almost a teenager. Boo. Like, but I love it because it reminds you of the events and the moments in your life. But what I've tried to see is, like, these are the moments where God has come through, or where my family, what my family has gone through in this journey. I try to use these tools to remind myself that God is good and that my family is why I do what I do. Like to remind myself to be faithful to my job and the community that God has blessed me with, to remind myself to stay connected to the Lord and the people in the hard times, and to remember that my journey has not always been perfect, but the Lord has always been there. Through these memories, I'm able to remind my kids of God's faithfulness in their journey and to help them remember the importance of journeying with God as the leader, but also embracing all that happens. Like I remind them, hey, to be present and to embrace the journey. And in the same way, God is instructing Joshua to have these 12 leaders from these 12 tribes place a rock from the Jordan where they're staying tonight as a reminder of God's faithfulness and the reminder of the importance of staying connected to the Lord. I mean, these rocks were to be a memorial of the journey to the promised land. They were to be a reminder that is not about the land, but it was about the relationships that were formed, restored, and nurtured throughout this journey. It was to remind them to journey together with God and each other. These rocks were to be a reminder to stay connected to God and others. And it wasn't just for them who actually did it. It was for all future posterity. It was for us to look at these rocks and say, man, we were in Egypt. Our grandparents, our parents, like they wandered the desert for 40 years and God brought us back. He stayed true to us the whole time and brought us back. We need to stay connected with one another and we need to stay connected with the Lord. And what Joshua 4, 6, and 7 is telling us is to be ready for a restored connection, we must remember our own journey. You have to remember your own journey. Like throughout the book of Joshua, we see this principle over and over and over again. I mean, if you go to Joshua 1, when God installs Joshua, when he tells Joshua, hey, you're going to be installed as the new leader of Israel, the first thing he says is, hey, you need to remember the lessons that Moses taught you. But if you take that farther down, what he's saying is you need to continue to live and teach the lessons that I taught Moses, that Moses taught you, that you need to teach the next people, and that they need to teach the next people, and they need to continue teaching. You need to continue to live in the way that you have been living. Then we get to 4, and they have the rocks in the Jordan. And if you go to 5, they actually continued to honor Passover in this promised land. Passover was a reminder of their time being enslaved. Passover was a reminder of the time that when they needed it most, God showed up in a miraculous way to save them. And they went back and they remembered that way. And then the Ark of the Covenant. We talked about the Ark went into the water first. The Ark of the Covenant is just a physical reminder of all the things that they have been through. You could find the stone tablets of the Ten Commandments. You can find Aaron's staff. You're going to find a golden pot of manna, which reminds them of the time they were in the desert and God opened up the sky and manna rained. It's a reminder of God's connectedness to them and that they need to be connected to the Lord and that this isn't a one-time thing. It's a reminder that God is the same God of Moses, that he is the same God of Abraham, and that he will be the same God that we've seen in David, that we've seen in Peter, that we've seen in Jesus. He's the same God. That is what this reminder is for us. Throughout the Israel's journey to the promised land, God instructed them to hold on to these items so that they could remember all that they had been through. When you think about your own life, what are the spiritual markers in your journey with the Lord? And maybe you're like, I don't even know what my spiritual journey is with the Lord. That's fine. Take it back one step. What are the memorable moments in your life that remind you that God exists? That remind you of other people in your life? Maybe you're sitting here right now and you're not aware of any way that God has shown up in your journey. Or maybe your only perspective is that God is evil and doesn't have your best interest at heart on this journey. Maybe you feel as though the cards that you have been dealt are really not super persuading for you to turn back to the Lord. Well, let me say this. I hear you. But this is the beauty of journeying together and not in isolation. What I've realized in my life is that oftentimes God sends people into your life to help you see you, to help you see yourself, to help you see all the things in your life the way that God has seen them, to give you the perspective in the midst of the storms and in the difficult seasons. I want to encourage you, don't let the storms and difficult seasons be the distraction that keep you from being connected to God and others. I want to encourage you to lean into the Lord and other people when life gets tough. So what are those spiritual markers in your journey with the Lord? What are those memorable moments in your life that remind you of God's goodness and of other people? So I started this message with a question. I said, how has your pursuit of the destination superseded your connection with God and others? Or how have you made your promised land more important than the relationships in your life? And I wouldn't be a pastor if if I didn't give you a challenge to succeed at this question this week. So if you have your phones, I'm going to give you a 3-step challenge for the week. I want to give you this challenge to help you begin to recognize the areas in your life that become more important than the relationships in your life. So step 1 I want you this week, I want you to pray daily. But I specifically want you to pray daily that God would make you aware of the distractions in your life. It is a simple prayer of saying, Lord, what are the deep, dark corners of my life that are keeping me from being connected with you, that are keeping me from connecting deeper with those that you've placed in my life? Daily. I want you, daily. This is an everyday thing. And then every day this week, I would love for you to spend 30 minutes or longer, however it takes you this week, reflecting on your own personal journey. And here are some of the things I want you to write down on your own personal journey. Write down people that impact your life and take note of how many times they come up. Write down verses that stand out to you. I just said that and something popped in your head. Write that down. Mine's John 15, the whole passage. Right? Write down the memorable moments in your life. It could be something like as extreme as, man, I remember this time that I had a red letter in my mailbox, which if you've never gotten a red letter from a utility company, that's a disconnect letter, right? And usually when you get that red letter, that disconnect letter, you go to your bank account, and it either has the money in there or it doesn't have the money in there, right? And there was a period where I remember not having it. It's a momentous moment because that check came in from somebody that I had no idea. Don't do like me. But I'm just saying, write that down. It's a moment to remember God's faithfulness. Write down your current perspective on those events. And I mean where you are right now. You can look at something that happened when you were 14 and just say, man, in today's lens, me as however old you are, this is how I see what happened. Write that perspective down. And then I want to encourage you to find an hour this week to pray and to share your findings with a person you trust in your life. And maybe that person is somebody that's on that second point. It's that person you wrote down. And you're like, man, so-and-so has popped up 4 or 5 times in my life in hard times. Find that person, see what they're doing. And I want you guys to pray and to share your findings. And let that person give you perspective on your journey. Hear them out on that perspective they give you. Now, the goal of this activity is not to just check a box and say, man, I prayed today. I spent 30 minutes. I texted so-and-so, haven't heard back. That's not the goal of what I want you to do today. What I want is to give you tangible goals that will help you begin to find clarity and focus in the midst of your journey. My hope is that you will find out more about how the Lord has shown up in your life through people, events, and even small moments. And the next time you gather with your small group, if you're a part of a small group, I would love for you to feel free to share your findings, but then to ask your community to pray for you, to continue to have that focus, to continue to have that clarity moving forward on your journey. Hey, as our team comes forward, I want to remind you that your life is best lived connected with God and others. And the book of Joshua shows us that even though we feel disconnected from God and others, we can prepare our hearts by consecrating every aspect of our lives to the Lord and by remembering where we have been and using that to propel us in faith to where we're going. Listen, God's path for you isn't just about reaching the end goal, but it's about living life connected with God and others. And knowing that we were not designed to journey alone. But it starts with God. So as we close, we're going to close with a song called Build My Life. And one of the reasons that I wanted to close with this song is because it talks about God being the foundational piece of building your life upon. It talks about God being the main thing in your life. And that we need to build our lives upon His love, because His love shows us to those around us, to the hearts of those around us. So I'm going to pray, but as I close this prayer, I would love for you to stand and sing